I want to waste no words in saying that Yura is by far the most compelling, interesting, and unhinged character I have ever had the pleasure of coming to know. I've long considered him in my top 5 of the whole series, and I can safely say that top 5 does not do him enough justice. The crown, the pedestal, and the throne are all his, and I doubt a single character will get even remotely close. So with that outrageous statement out of the way, I guess I should explain just why I feel this way. If you were expecting a chapter review, you'll get it, but not in its usual style. This will involve a lot of backtracking, a fuckload of subtext, and some perfectly reasonable theory crafting to fill in the rest of the blanks. Because I genuinely think this chapter is not only the best that Kagurabachi has ever been, but it reveals so much if you just pay attention to the quiet, underlying nuances. Chapter 31, aptly titled Greetings, is our first look at Yura the Phantom. Confident, brazen, and impossible to read. I know I've used this word before, but nothing fits him better. An enigma. A black suit, a black tie, blending into the crowd of your average mafioso. And for a while, that was all you knew. You learned about him piecemeal through the Hishaku and through characters like Hiruhiko or Kuguri, but everything was still shrouded beneath a thick veil of anonymity. Until this moment happens. He takes off his jacket. What looks like a completely meaningless gesture in the midst of intense battle actually screams in volume so loud, my ears practically ruptured when I first witnessed it. Everything you thought you knew about Yura, everything you'd come to recognize him for, suddenly undoes itself. Like a layer to an onion, a new one begins to reveal itself. The man you see from this point on is, dare I say, a completely different character. But for this to really settle in, let's talk psychology for a second. Split identity is one of the most fascinating tropes in fiction, not just because of the wildly different approaches authors take, but because of its mental implications alone. Like a vigilante wearing a costume, you switch between two personalities, all to survive two completely different worlds. A cutthroat underworld like Japan's demands stoicism, discarding morality, an unbreakable will, and the power to never lose what you've gained. And similar to Chihiro, this masked man persona is there to shield his past self, someone far more vulnerable, emotional, regular. This is Yura the man, and it's not the first time you've met him. Under the guise of a yakuza exist moments of serenity, be that on the playground, sipping a beverage with the hat Hishaku, or even his side quest for a toilet break. One of Yura's most charming qualities has always been just how human he is, and rather than it being a manipulation tactic or an attempt to fit in, these are his true colors shining through, ever so briefly. What first seem like unorthodox environments for criminal activity suddenly have a drastically different tone and meaning to them. There's a reason Hokazono chose to give one of Yura's biggest scenes the design of a coin flip, as there is just as much reason that one of his major fights is against a man who fights with coins. A phrase exists, one you and I know fair well, Hyori Ittai, two sides of the same coin. Last week I went in depth into just how much the Tobimune contrasts Namagatsumi, and now I can ascertain that this is what Hokazono wanted all along, for the blades to parallel and their wielders along with it. I don't need to spell out how a wife dying of illness is comparable to a wife dying by calamity, but the part to really focus on here is the financial disparity. It goes without saying that Samura was living life lavishly, even divorced, owning a dojo and with an estate more than big enough to raise a child or two. That veteran status gave him more than he could have ever asked for, which only further highlights the other side of the story, the victims. Yura being an islander, at least to me, is undeniable at this point. Not only do we get to learn that they were living in occupied territory, but speaking about the heroes in grateful and hopeful tones, wishing they'll continue to protect this country and its people, you can't get more obvious than that. Such remarks become pointless if this was spoken from a Japanese perspective. Of course, the heroes would protect their own land, but from someone in a foreign country, now it reads like an acknowledgement of aid, almost like a pledge of gratitude, something said with the expectation that a promise will be upheld, with that promise being the peace treaty itself. And given the situation of the Shokoku and their measly 200,000 population, Yura's position in this society is clear. He is a minority, living in low-income Chinese-inspired housing, it's not nearly as dire as the Kyonagi household, but you can still see that resources are thin. From creaking old dining chairs to not having a TV like Iori's residence, only a radio to rely on. And when you consider that this is occupied territory, land seized by Japan, a picture starts to form itself. Shoddy, uneven roads, damaged infrastructure, and the environment scarred by the invasion that took place shortly after the Shinichi's release. Yura surviving the war as a civilian is a kind of miracle in itself, so returning to a kind of normalcy becomes something to be profoundly grateful for. And because of all that destruction, there's one panel Hokuzono wants you to pay the utmost attention to. This big, dazzling diamond ring sparkling in the midst of it all. It's commonly understood that if there's one thing a man will never skimp out on, that would be a wedding ring. Seen as the highest form of commitment, for it demands ludicrous discipline and financial awareness. A testament to Yura's tenacity, his unshakable will to chase what he wants most in life. And you see that extremity on the other side of the coin just as well. While Char's mother died valiantly fighting to earn her child a semblance of freedom, and Inori's death was spelled long ago through illness diagnosis, the death of Yura's wife is a tragedy. Instant, without warning, with no time to prepare. Just like how Kunishige was murdered in under 10 seconds, Yura's wife is brutalized by external forces in an implied similar amount of time. Whether this force is the malediction or not is yet to be determined, but I have my doubts due to not seeing any flowers or encroachment in her dying moments. Also, I imagine Yura would come to hate the malediction rather than adore it, if that was the cause of his wife's murder. And this brings me to one of the most crucial pieces of Yura's characterization: ego death. Chapter 87 describes the Hishaku as if they were phantoms. The Japanese word used here is bore, which keeps that exact same meaning in mind, but has even deeper connotation. A vengeful spirit haunting the land of the living for the sake of a grudge. Make no mistake, Yura the man is dead. He died that day with his wife in hand. What remained afterward became the symbolic specter, a vengeful ghost who we now understand to be Yura the Phantom. Forging a pseudonym to reflect both his emotional state and yet still stay in touch with his past self, this type of naming recontextualization is the stuff of legends. And like the wording implies, ghosts haunt the world of the living with the clinging emotions in mind. And those emotions of the past still peek through from time to time, as I pointed out with the earlier examples. Whew, that was an emotional read. Let's take a little break for our weekly dose of parallel botching. The death of a loved one I already went through, yet this chapter has a few interesting instances worth scrubbing off. Chihiro wanted to kill Yura. That much is true, and that much will remain true. Yet in this moment of utter disbelief at finally hearing the truth he's long been searching for, Yura is not allowed to die. In a callback clear as can be, these are two broken men who want to understand one another, and only then think through what must be done. But Akemura has other plans. Similar to Chihiro, who comes to understand Kyora and then slices him to death, here too Chihiro stabs Yura in the neck, thus killing him. Yet, as chapter 40 already showed with the Shinichi, death is merely the beginning. Paired with the Suzaku's restoration having a tug of war against being taken over, only this time in complete fashion, these two arcs complement one another beautifully. Like a satanic ritual or a pop culture nod to The Exorcist, this biblical cross-posing is framed as both rigid and unnatural to the human body, yet somehow simultaneously feel like the descent of a deity. Whether it's the Antichrist or the man who will save Japan, even the black outlines on this page tell you that this is yet another massive story-shifting moment. And one final note, food themes. Yura can cook, Kunishige cannot. In the world of who is the better husband, there's a clear champion here, and you won't like my answer. Alright, back to the serious stuff. Hokuzono loves My Hero Academia. For Christ's sake, the guy's friends with the author and has hosted multiple interviews. Of course he does. So you can imagine that, like his list of numerous other series he marks as inspiration, My Hero Academia should be considered one as well. Heroes as a thematic thematic has been under much scrutiny throughout the serialization of this manga, but one thing is clear. Nobody actually wants to be one. Nobody except Yura. The pressure, the expectation, and the idea of having to call yourself someone great is too much for any sensible person to carry. Being objectified, being boiled down to a singular aspect, all of which only gets worse when those actions of heroism are tied to your merciless brutality in a life or death setting. But like Tomura Shigaraki once said, the villains need a hero of their own. And with this quote in mind, I truly believe we finally have the answer to what the Hishaku are. What do they represent? And just what does the name of the organization even stand for? And the unbelievable part, the answer was always there. Hidden in the Japanese version of chapter 100, Yura invites Akemura to join us. This us refers to the Hishaku. In this chapter, Yura speaks of the Hishaku as if it was a part of himself, an extension of his own will. When the blame is put onto the Hishaku, he takes great offense in that. When Chihiro says that the Hishaku started all of this, he takes great offense in that. The Hishaku are a group of nobodies, people that don't matter. It's not that their records were erased because they're important in status, but the polar opposite. Just like Yura, they're all minorities. In his words, we are no one. We were no one at all. There had long been talk about just what the salvation kanji refers to in the Hishaku's name, and I think that's the answer. The Hishaku are a safe haven for those who don't belong, those who can't belong. Yura shows his biggest emotional burst at the fact that his wife died because the enchanted blades were sealed. Those enchanted blades acted as repellent for any evildoers, for they'd understand the repercussions that would follow immediately after. Sealing the enchanted blades would then be seen as a kind of green light, further propelling crime into the state that it now lies in. In Yura's words, your father created this world, and he had to suffer because of it. And similarly, I have good reason to believe that in one way or another, all of the Hishaku suffered from the Kunishige's world just as much. Recycling the dead loved one trope 10 times over would get boring and fast. But good thing we don't have to, because if Hiruhiko's backstory is anything to go off of, they are sure to be incredibly varied in their contents. I've long since paraded the idea that it's impossible to find normalcy in a Yakuza setting, but I find it hard to believe that the Hishaku are anything but a ragtag group of people that got together through circumstance of oppression. One way or another, being discriminated by the government and its violent sorcery outbreak. This would never excuse the sacrifices that would come to take place, including colluding with those same evil people, but it gives reason, it gives origin, it gives context. And with that context, the Sword Bearer Assassination title finally finds its anchor point. Yura has long since waved the term sin around, with its definition expanding ever so slightly, and this chapter adds what I believe to be the most important layer to that label: absence. Nobody was there when Yura's wife was murdered. Nobody was there when Hiruhiko was brutally assaulted. And as far as they're concerned, that absence is punishable only by death. To them, doing nothing is the same as endorsing those actions, turning from heroes to heroes, one with evil.